Welcome to a solo show. This sort of follows on from a conversation I had with Chris Penfold a few weeks ago, which was the making good amend. This one's really about when you're creating or when you're coming up with ideas, using what you've got instead of, thinking about acquiring something new. One of the things that I try to stick to with podcasting, not just that, but any sort of creative endeavors, is to use the things I've already got and think creatively about the stuff that I'm using instead of just going out and buying a new bit of kit, because you can just cost a lot of money. I mean, initially, in the early days when I was podcasting, I bought a couple of cameras and things, which in the end I didn't really use. So, it's about that sort of mindset of what you need to be creative. So, thinking about this from a material point of view, you could obviously save yourself a lot of money, but you could become very creative about reapplying technology that you've already got or ways of operating. And I've often found, for me personally, so this, it might not be the same for you, but I quite like to work analog, old style. So if I'm coming up with ideas, I will either dictate them or I'll write them down on a pad. I find it's easier for that in that way because it gets it out of my head into some sort of tangible way that's sort of tactile. So I'm not particularly good at typing direct into into a computer or something like that. Just sort of leaves me cold. For other people, it'd be great, but it just doesn't sort of work for me. Now, I was listening to a book recently by on Audible by a guy called Martin Proctel, and it's all about his life in Guatemala. And he was saying at the beginning in the acknowledgements that thank you to the person who was typing up his scribbled notes. And he is obviously somebody who, like me, can't get on with doing things direct to computers and stuff. It sort of leaves me cold. I find it really difficult reading off a screen as well. So that might just be an age thing. However, if that's how you operate, then do what works for you. So you're using the skills you've already got, even if that appears to be the only skills you have, which may be another thing that we could have put as a title. But I think this is really important. I often see people in the sort of teaching work that I do, and they're always looking for the next thing, that the next pedal, the next the next guitar, the next and it's like, well, no, you've already got it. You've already got the gear. You've already got, so in some ways, you've already got the skills. You've just got to present them in a particular way that makes them more musical. A number of years ago, I interviewed Billy Childish, the artist, and Bill's, I suppose you could call him a sort of a punk musician. I don't know what he calls himself, actually. I mean, the sort of style is sort of like what they call Medway garage, sort of punk style. But Bill comes out of this aspect of using sort of primitivism, I suppose, particularly musically. So he uses this idea of limitation being really a good thing. So he's got a couple of old amps which date back to the 1960s, I believe, or it might even be earlier than that. Because one of them was an old Selmer amp that I know that he was using. A couple of old battered up guitars, and he's managed to produce well over 150 albums. Bill was also a big influence on people like Jack White of the White Stripes. Um, and it's this idea of, and also the recording, as I was saying about garage, because the material was recorded in a garage and they would put the vocals over the top in a studio. And that's how he manages to produce so many albums. Now, you might think, well, we don't do that sort of stuff. We do, yeah, that's fine. But the point about it is, it's always about your thought process, your processes. So I'm sort of more interested in the approach with these things, not the result, because hopefully you can come up with things completely different from me, things that I've never thought of. That's the whole point. But as I say, by interviewing people and speaking to creatives, you realise that they've got a lot of these type of ideas, which on the face of it are sort of quite retro, quite restrictive, and this idea of restricting yourself to what you've already got, and just being very good at rethinking and reworking ideas is probably the skill, maybe, of creatives. Another thing about using what you've got is in this idea of networking. There's a guy called Jay Abraham who, I suppose he's still with us, I don't know, a bit of a sort of marketing guru in America. A big influence on people like Tony Robbins. And Jay was brilliant at thinking outside the box, taking techniques from one business and applying it to another one that seemed to be diametrically opposite to what was already going on. And one of his things that he would get you to do was to write down a list of everything you could do that you thought you were good at, and all the things that you thought you were bad at. And then a list of everybody you knew. And this is obviously the days before Facebook groups and all the rest of it. But the idea was that you were sitting on a gold mine of information, people, and resources. I was always struck by how clever that was, because the idea is that you re-engage with those people and you get them involved, basically. We get this idea all the time about networking, but we don't really, we make contacts, but don't really use them, and we don't use them very well. And what I mean by that is, when people contact you out of the blue, they're all normally asking you for something, right? I mean, how often do you get an email and it's actually asking you to buy something or asking you to, it's just rubbish, isn't it? The thing about really sort of engaging with people is finding out how they are with no reason other than that, just making contact. And then maybe over a period of time, see if you can get them interested or involved in a way that benefits them in maybe something that you're doing. So as an example, I mean, if you're a gigging band and you make contact with somebody else who's got a band, maybe they can do a support act or something for you if they're interested in doing that. or some joint venture. Now, when you go to sort of start projects, maybe a band or something like that, instead of just putting it out there to find a drummer, have a look around who you know, and start from that viewpoint. Maybe limit yourself to that instead of putting ads out. I don't think there are certainly things that people used to do, maybe not so much now, but the thing is, it's not just the people you know, it's the people that they know. The degrees of separation stuff, where you can really be in contact with a lot of people. Now, there was a great book by Tony Bazan, who was the guy who came up with the idea of mind mapping, called Genius. And he wrote it with the guy, I can't remember the guy's name now, who was a sort of chess master who used to write a lot of the chess puzzles for, I think his name was Raymond Keane. He used to write for the British National Press, doing chess puzzles. And it was all about people who they considered as geniuses. And the fact that one of the characteristics that seemed to go with these type of people is that they were always part of a group of people. Nobody did it on their own. So if you had a famous person, they knew somebody else who was really famous. That type of thing. So that their ideas weren't necessarily happening. They weren't happening in isolation, that's the point. And then at certain other points, they would certainly be working in conjunction with people. They even pointed out that people that were famous sort of religious figures or mystical figures knew others. So they mentioned that, obviously, we have to accept whether these people existed or not, but Lao Tzu knew Confucius, and Christ knew John the Baptist, and in fact he was related to him in some shape or form. Alexander the Great knew Aristotle. In fact, Aristotle was his teacher. And you sort of look at that and you think, this is sort of weird, really, isn't it? It's like British buses. You wait for one and then suddenly three come along at the same time. But I think this is actually quite interesting. It's all about looking at what you've got and reassessing how that works, instead of looking that you need this other thing to do the whatever. So, as an example, to get things into our sort of frame of reference, that the recording equipment that was used to record songs, the Beatles or whatever, you got more technology on your phone than they had. We've probably got more technology on our phone than they had to get somebody on the moon. We don't need hardly anything to create. I mean, think about it. I'm sitting in our sort of office spare room here. It's nothing special. It's just a room in a house. It's not soundproofed or whatever. Okay, the office that I use for my teaching work has got a little bit of soundproofing and stuff like that, but it's nothing particular. And that idea is, I think, the essence of creative thinking. We've got Blues Camp coming up in the UK in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm actually going to be focusing on this idea of how we can strip everything back and become more creative than if we go down the usual mindset. I'd be interested, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it, because it's always an experiment when we do these things. But I know that people will walk out with new skills. And one of those is that they've already got whatever is required, basically, to succeed. They just have to look at the world slightly differently. So one other thing, just to sort of wrap up here, I'm going to come at this from a sort of slightly Zen perspective on things. In the West, we've always got this idea of aspiring. Even in our sort of religious aspects. And of course, we might think, well, I'm not religious and I believe in Christianity, blah, blah, blah. But Christianity is totally baked into the way that we think in the West. The hierarchical thinking that we have, the fact that there is an answer to something, and somebody's an expert and they've got the answer. They've got the book that's got all the answers in it, type of idea. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the East, it doesn't tend to work that way. So going from this sort of Zen thing, or just sort of a Buddhist, even sort of more of a Tantra type of thing, there's the perspective is, of course, you know it already, you've got it. But it's a bit like, the consciousness is a bit like the sky. And the sky, by its very nature, is completely empty. But within it, it contains everything that we see, the clouds, the birds, and all the rest of it. So that, the clouds and the birds aren't actually the sky, they're in the sky. And that's such a good analogy to thinking, consciousness, and all the rest of it, that, we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts arise just sort of naturally, and in that way, creativity is the same thing. In that it arises, you are the vessel and conduit for that to come. But those songs aren't you. And I think that's sort of quite interesting if you think, well, if we've already got the answer, but we just have to sort of shut up a bit, or just listen deeply. And definitely when I get people to listen to what they're doing, not just hear, but listen and feel what they're doing, their ability to play musically increases enormously. In other words, it's just sort of shut up and just let it come. So that's quite an optimistic way of looking at the world, that you've already got the skills. Creativity is something that is what humans do. It's only when we think that we can't do it that our mind obliges by not allowing you to be creative. So just unlocking things and getting out in nature and just seeing what goes on there, and then look at the skills that you have. Look, and I don't mean that from the point of view that you're a good piano player or something like that. It's the skills that you have is your ability to hear, to make up ideas, to if you use techniques like cut up, to conjure lyrics, take ideas that already exist and change them around, see what you get. And then remember that all of this stuff is just a journey. So when you do something, it doesn't mean to say that you're even progressing. It's like this idea of evolution. It's not really progressing. It's just adapting. The more you use music, the more you adapt to the ability to use music. So until next time, I've got a few people in the pipeline, but it's an interesting time of year. A lot of people are away. Number of musicians on tour, which I'm chasing up. But hopefully, I've got a couple of fascinating characters. Just a case of waiting for them to come back off holiday and all the rest of it to talk to. So until then, I'll see you then, and have fun creating. Bye.